10-Minute Jazz Lesson Podcast, episode 97. Hey everybody, welcome back to episode 97 of the 10-Minute Jazz Lesson Podcast. My name is Nick Manella, and I am here to guide you through the next 10 minutes of jazz instruction. If you're new to the podcast, welcome in. We are slowly but steadily closing in on our 100th episode. Really excited about that. And if you're a long-time listener to the podcast, thank you so much for tuning in every week and supporting the show. Remember that these episodes all come with PDFs. If you'd like to get them, please head over to our Patreon site. That's patreon.com/10-minute jazz lesson. Or you can head over to our website and click any of those Patreon links to go over there, show your support for the show for a very small amount of money every single month, and get your hands on those PDFs and a lot more. I like to drop some transcriptions in there and other extras for supporters of the show. So if you were thinking about doing it, please go and do it as we close in on this 100th episode. We really need that support to keep the show going to 200 episodes. Before we get into today's episode, I wanted to give a quick little 30-second plug for our sponsor, Rejuvenate. If you're a reed player and you are just sick of dealing with really kind of crappy reeds, you've got to give Rejuvenate a try. Now, I don't know about all of you out there, but I spend a lot of money on reeds, and reeds are not cheap. They're actually very expensive. So nothing upsets me more than when I spend all my hard-earned money on reeds and then they don't play, right? And they dry out and get wet, and all those things that we do, we put the reeds through a lot of stress when we're doing that. But with Rejuvenate, you can end all of that stress on the reed and end all of that stress on yourself by using their brand new reed storage system that keeps the reeds at a constant humidity level, at a constant moisture level the entire time they're in the case, which results in a much longer lasting reed and a much less finicky reed. So make sure you go and check them out. They are at rejuvenate.com, or again, you can jump over to our website and click on the link to the Rejuvenate site. Check them out. They are awesome, and they will save you a ton of time, money, and frustration on reeds. Okay, let's jump into today's episode. So today's episode is called the Neverending Exercise, and that is absolutely a true statement. This is a very simple exercise, but one that you can do so many different variations on that it is going to take you forever to find all of them, and you may never even find all of the variations on this particular exercise. When we first start out, what you're going to see is that it's about the simplest thing that you could imagine. What we're just doing is we're playing triads in fourths. So in this podcast, we talk a lot about how the majority of jazz music, well, not really the majority, but so much of jazz music moves in the interval of a fourth, right? So like look at a 2-5-1. Those are all intervals of fourths. Jazz composers love to use chords that are a fourth apart. It's just kind of the quintessential sound of jazz. So therefore, it would make a lot of sense for us to practice exercises that deal with fourths. So this is why we're practicing our triads in fourths. And this particular stuff that I'm going to show you on this episode and next episode is all going to deal with the major triad, but you can certainly do this with triads of any quality. And in fact, I highly suggest that you do that. So exercise number 1 on your sheet is going to be the simplest thing for today, and it's going to be the one that you'll probably be able to grasp onto pretty quickly. But I want to point out that you should be learning this first exercise before you do any of the other exercises that I'm going to show you today. You need to be able to play from every single major triad in root position to the triad a fourth away from that in root position. So I would spend, if you've never done this before, I would spend a couple of days, a couple of weeks, whatever, getting this up to a reasonable tempo and being able to do it without looking at the sheet. That's super, super important. Do not look at the sheet when you practice this, because you need to get that chord progression of chords moving in fourths into your head. That's going to come in handy in so many different situations when you're playing jazz music, that's one of the main points of this exercise, is that you're trying to get those fourths totally in your brain and able to do them without much hesitation at all. So here's what exercise number 1 sounds like. This is major triads in root position, moving in fourths. So that should sound pretty familiar to you. If you've been playing jazz for a while, that is a pretty familiar sound. You know, that succession of fourths, and then a major triads should sound pretty normal to you. Okay, so here's where it gets really fun and also really challenging, and where you're going to open up some doors for yourself. So instead of just playing up the triads, what we're going to do is we're going to add a chromatic passing tone in between those. We're going to keep them in root position, but what you'll notice is that you end one triad on the 5th, and then the next note that begins the next triad is down a step, right? Because we're moving in fourths. So what we're going to do is we're going to use a chromatic passing tone to link the 2 triads together, and then all of a sudden this very simple exercise becomes really cool sounding. So this is what exercise number 2 on your sheet will be. So that adds a lot more interest to that particular exercise. Now we're not just playing pure triads, we're playing triads with that chromatic passing tone. We all know how important chromatics are, so that's a great way to practice a little bit of that. So exercise number 3, now we're getting pretty difficult. What we're going to actually do is we're going to start on the 3rd of each triad, and we're going to use a whole step passing tone to get us down to the 3rd of the next triad. So think about this for a second. If we go up 3, 5, 1, then we can go a whole step down, and we are a half step away from the 3rd of the next triad. So this is a really interesting one as well, but this is where we start to ratchet up the difficulty a little bit. So if this one really gives you trouble, don't dismay over that. Just make sure that you keep working on it, because this is really going to test your knowledge of the triads and being able to link thirds to thirds. So here's what exercise number 3 sounds like. Now, I wouldn't be surprised if you've actually heard that exercise before. It's a very common exercise that a lot of jazz musicians like to play. I know that, previously I had heard that a lot, but never really knew what it was until I kind of stopped and figured it out. But do you hear how much more melodic that one sounds? The 3rd is such a melodic note. It's such a great note that it gives that exercise just this really pretty sound to it. And that's the advantage of starting a phrase on the 3rd. We've talked about that a little bit before, but I do think it's a really important point to bring up. So now what we're going to do is we're going to go up to the 5th, and we're going to use that whole step passing tone again, only this time we're actually going to use 2 whole steps to link the 3rd from one chord to the 5th of the next chord. So we're starting on the 5th, going 5, 1, 3, going down a whole step, and then going down another whole step to start on the 5th of the next chord. So we did something with the root, we did something with the 3rd, and now finally we're doing something with the 5th. So hopefully you're starting to get why this is the never-ending exercise. There's so many possibilities. Here's what exercise number 4 sounds like on this week's PDF. All right, so there it is, the last exercise for this week. And like I said before I started playing it, it's really called the Never-Ending Exercise for a reason, because there's so much stuff we can do with it. And next week, we're going to talk about even more things that you can do with it. You could really practice a lot of chromatics. You can do a whole bunch of different things with this exercise that are really, really going to challenge your fingers and challenge your brain. So one more thing before we go today, you'll notice in a lot of this that I'm displacing octaves, and you're going to have to do that on your instrument. You can't just play this stuff straight up through all 12 keys unless you play an instrument like piano or guitar with a humongous range. Most other instruments, you're going to have to displace some octaves. So if you're wondering why I'm jumping down sometimes, it's because, this stuff doesn't really fit on the saxophone. And most of the time I write the exercises for the saxophone just because that's what I know and that's what I play. And I think the limitations of the saxophone actually work to our advantage sometimes, because we have to come up with creative ways to get around those limitations. So that's why I'm displacing octaves a lot of the time, in case you were wondering. So if you've got any questions about this, email me, 10minutejazzlesson@gmail.com. And remember to go and check out our sponsor, Rejuvenate. It's really going to make a big difference in the life of your reeds and the playability of those reeds. So go and check them out, rejuvenate.com, or hop onto our website and click on that link if you don't know how to spell rejuvenate. All right. So we'll see you on Monday with a Motivation Monday podcast, and we'll talk to you all soon. Have a great weekend. Bye.